Welcome again to the Overrated podcast, where we discuss if things are overhyped or undervalued. This is episode 2, and we're going to be talking about Christian things, Christian music, TV shows, movies, cartoons. Again, by no means do we mean are things bad or good, but just overhyped or undervalued. Let's meet our guest today.
My name's Bree. My dad's actually a pastor, and he's been pastor my whole life, so I grew up in the church most of my life, and you can find me on Instagram at b.fl0.
Hey everyone, I'm Joseph Saeed. I'm a photographer here in Omaha, and I met Kevin through a church friend, and so, we've been friends ever since, and that's kind of how we know each other and have a similar background. You can find me on Instagram at Joseph, Said.
Hi, I'm Nylot. I kind of grew up in the Christian background too, and then you can find me on Instagram. I think it's like Nylot.
Hi, my name's Lucas. I'm a videographer here in Omaha. Yeah, no, I grew up in also a Christian background as well for most of my life, so interested and excited to chat about some stuff today. So,
All right, for the first topic, we're going to do Christian music. What do you guys think?
I think the label of Christian music is overrated and also maybe overused because there's no set like bar as to what's Christian and what's not Christian music. Like there's artists that will market themselves as Christian artists, but people like Lecrae who has been doing it for decades now. His music's definitely evolved over time, where originally it may have been very like more fundamental, very overt lyrics about Christianity and themes of the Bible. Whereas now his music has become more like metaphorical or more about current events, which still relates to issues that the Bible talked about, but it's not as like direct and to the point in relating to Christian themes. So, and also, is that artist allowed to make music that isn't about something directly related to the Bible? So I think that label definitely is overrated because you're limiting your creativity to just.
Time's up.
Oh, dang, that was quick. But yeah, I think in short, yeah, it's overrated for sure. So
Those were a lot of good points. I could jump in here real quick. So I guess towards the end there, Lucas, when you were talking about the label itself, I when I look at Christian music, so overall, I think it could be underrated. And what I mean by that is, I feel like when you put that label Christian in front of that, in front of music, it tends to like give off a certain perception, like to people who aren't Christians, for example, like they might associate that with like very like gospel music or like music that only really centers around like theology and different things like that. But obviously there's artists like Lecrae who have evolved over time to kind of like they've just progressed in their musical journey where it may not be like as biblically focused or whatever you want to call it. But I mean, when I started listening to Christian music, it was really like through like K-Love. I don't know if you guys have probably had that, that experience of listening to a radio station called K-Love. And so, oh wow, that was fast. Yeah,
it's quick, bro. It's quick.
Gotta get straight to the point.
So I kind of agree with both what they're both saying, but I think it's underrated because when I think of Christian music, I think of like songs I heard in church. So I'm probably not gonna add it on my playlists and stuff, but I agree with it being underrated.
Oh, I agree with Milo. I feel underrated as well. Like, I feel like it all goes off of the definition of what Christian music really is, or like what people define as Christian music, because I feel like everyone has their own kind of definition of what they think it is. So, yeah, that's all to say.
I think it's underrated too. Like going along with Joe, every time you think of something Christian, you think of it as corny and bad. So I'm pretty sure there's a lot of artists that will like surprise people. So I don't think we even have to vote. Sorry, Lucas, but I think you've been.
Yeah, I did have an interesting question that I did come up with while you guys were talking, because you got brought up good points, and I do think there's a lot of quality artists in that genre too. It's definitely not that, but like, how many songs would an artist have to make, let's say, that isn't labeled as Christian before you would consider them like a Christian artist? Because it made me think of like more secular artists that have made gospel themed songs.
Mm-hmm.
So then do you rate those songs separately from the rest of that artist's library, or do you rate those like as a like as their whole body of work? You know what I mean? Do you like, I don't know. It just made me think about, because I think about certain artists that aren't part of that space that definitely have contributed a couple songs, you know? So.
That's
No,
a very good question. Yeah, because like when you said that, Lucas, it made me think of who was it? Snoop Dogg. Like he had like a gospel album, right? And like if you compare that to the rest of his music, obviously it's like an anomaly because that's not the type of music that he generally makes. So yeah, it's a good question to kind of ask, like, where is that line? Because obviously with artists like Kanye, for example, like recently, you know, he said he's done making secular music. So I don't know. I guess it's like a fine line, and maybe it's up to the person to decide, you know, like how they see that artist. But that's a good.
No, I agree with everything that everybody said. I'm gonna say underrated because I've never heard of any Christian comedians. So I'm just not, like, when I think of Christian comedians, I don't really think they could be funny because like they're gonna be making jokes about the Bible or something like that. So I don't really think that's funny. But yeah, so I just say underrated because I've never heard of it.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Nala because I never heard of any Christian comedians. I feel like comedy is a lot of like dark humor, and I feel like that would cross a lot of lines if they were enter that realm. So
I think it's definitely underrated too. When you talk about the top of the people in that category, it's like, because you're, like they said, comedy is normally super dark and you have to go across a lot of lines to achieve a level of humor. But with these guys, they've learned how to really navigate, how to make something funny out of something, like the whole subject of Christianity, but without ever really getting near those lines. Like they can get a good laugh out of you, especially if you've grown up in churches and stuff and are familiar with some of the trends you see from people that have nothing to do with the Bible or the gospel or anything like that. But I'm sure there's a good amount of them that are really like corny and cheesy, like, oh, that's, you know, I've heard that joke 1,000 times. But I know there's a couple dudes that or people that really stand out in that field that I think they're underrated because they get you to laugh while having all these limitations on them of not being able to talk about a lot of things. So
Yeah, I mean, overall, I would have to say it's underrated. So just because of the nature, like, of Christian comedy, it's like a pretty niche audience. I mean, like, if you're not like a Christian, you know, you probably won't get a lot of the jokes, right? So I guess that kind of makes it hard to, I don't know, to enjoy it if you're not a Christian, for example. But there are a lot of great comedians, like Lucas was saying. But I, I'm honestly torn on if I want to say that it's like more competitive to be a Christian comedian than not. Because if your stuff's really good, like, you know, you could rise to the top faster since there's, you know, less like really big like Christian comedian stars, you know. But overall, I'd have to say it's underrated because yeah, it's just, I feel like there's not that many like really big Christian comedians that have quality material. But overall, I tend to enjoy it, you know.
when you guys were talking, that kind of leads to this question I'm gonna ask. Why do you think that talented people leave the church, like Whitney Houston for music, or anyone that's really talented at the craft? You see that they start off going to church and making stuff, and then they always kind of pivot. What do you guys think about that?
So one reason I think maybe could be is like, you know, having reached a wider audience. Because once you put that label Christian in front of anything, like no matter what the field, I feel like it does kind of like alienate or limit like the potential audience or fans of whatever you're doing. And I think another big reason would be just the way to monetize that. Like, obviously when you have like a bigger like fan base or whatever, like there's more opportunities to like get brand deals or like get signed to a bigger label or something like that. So I think, you know, that might be a pretty big factor in why really talented people tend to leave the church, is the ability to kind of like reach out to more people and I don't know, build like a bigger career for themselves.
I feel like once you throw the word Christian in front of someone's name, I feel like that holds them to a higher standard. So I feel like in order to like kind of like avoid a certain range of disappointment in a way, and also to kind of like he said, to reach a wider audience, I feel like they kind of like take that off of them so that they don't necessarily disappoint a whole group of community of people or something like that. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but yeah, across the board.
I think that's a really good point that you brought up about disappointing people. when you put that label, it's like people forget that you're still a human being, and they're just like, all right, like now this person better be picture perfect in their like life, both on camera and off camera, and then they just do something that plenty of people have made, whether it's a mistake or just something that maybe the church isn't happy with, and they get like what 2020 we call canceled, but whereas if they were in a in a non Christian label in front of their name, they could just kind of be themselves more, which at the end of the day, I think that's the goal, is to be your honest self and then work on that, rather than trying to hide who you really are and be this fake persona in front of people.
Yeah, going off what Lucas just said, I agree with that, because when you put Christian in front of it, I feel like people think you have to act a certain way, so they can't act the way they want to. So instead of making that the new norm, they just cut it all off completely.
All right, next topic: Christian movies.
I'll try to sum it up in 60 seconds. It comes down to, and I maybe it doesn't say this verbatim in the Bible, but I think in whether you're in the church and Christian, whatever it is you're doing, to do it with excellence. That's, I think, what's expected of, or to do, you give it your best. And so I try to do that with everything. But with movies, what I noticed with Christian movies versus non-Christian movies is Christian movies in the community, their respective circle, get like they have a lower standard to aspire to, or they're given a lower standard to aspire to. So a movie objectively may not be that great, and like a Christian movie may not be that great, but because it has Christian themes in it, the community will just elevate that movie to this like level where it's one of the best movies ever. But when compared to just, again, that a more objective sense of what a movie makes a movie good, it's not that great. And I think people, and like I talked to some of the guys earlier before the podcast, like a lot of these movies have the budget to do better. You don't need a big budget anymore to make a great movie. So that excuse is kind of like doesn't mean anything anymore. And so I just wish more people in that circle would aspire to a higher level of excellence. And I mean, I could go on about other things about the movies that I wish were done differently, but just to kind of keep it summed up, I think they're overrated. And Book of Eli is a very Kevin is a that's like a cheap shot, because that's not that you could argue that's not a Christian movie. That's very much in the gray area of Christian versus non-Christian, but that's a separate conversation.
That's going to be next.
Keep it
I feel
short.
like that's a bigger overall theme, though. Is like it's so hard sometimes to decide like
Yeah.
what constitutes Christian like media.
Yeah.
Like is it just because it has biblical/Christian themes, or is it because like the people making it are Christians? Like,
yeah,
I don't know.
The movies I'm talking about are the ones in the bottom left, not the top right. So just to keep it short, if I had to say one or the other, I think overrated. But like I say that in a loving way of like, let's change that. But yeah, overrated.
Okay, Lucas, I gotta ask you a quick question.
Sure.
Could you give me like the best Christian movie you think you've ever seen, and then maybe the not one?
The best Christian movie I remember seeing was Fireproof. I haven't seen a ton of them, but I remember Fireproof was a great movie because it didn't rely on what they call the Deus Ex Machina in storytelling, which is you have this story-driven plot, and then there's going to be a roadblock in that plot. So there just has to be this force of God, miraculous force that operates in the story. That is, you can't, but it just keeps the story going forward. And the term Deus Ex Machina ironically means God without the machine. And I feel like that's the problem if you're making a movie about Christian things, is you want to incorporate maybe miracles and stuff. But when you're doing a story that's fictional and you're making up the story, it's very easy to run into a problem in your script or your story and just like, we can just scrub that with God intervened. And it's like, there's a way to do that, I think, and there's I think a good way to do that in movies, but I feel like it definitely gets taken advantage of in the storytelling of what these bottom left movies maybe contain. So as a whole,
I don't think I could really either choose if they're underrated or overrated, just because I've seen a couple of Christian movies, and I personally, the acting was so bad that it distracted me from the whole concept of like what the movie was about. So maybe the message behind it is good, but the acting typically isn't the best. So I prefer to not watch them just because of that. So I don't think I have an opinion on it's either overrated or underrated.
I personally feel like it's overrated only because like I feel like in order to achieve a certain amount of like entertainment, you kind of have to go off of like facts, if that makes sense, just in order to like reach a wider audience. I don't feel like they're actually all accurate. They're actually like all following the Bible as far as the script goes, just to make it more entertaining. So I feel like it's overrated.
I would say I feel like they tend to be overrated too. And the reason why I would say is honestly, usually it comes down to kind of quality problems. It's not necessarily like the content of the movie. Kind of like Lucas was saying, for me, like the reason that I think they can be like overrated is usually it comes down to either like bad acting maybe or like lower production value, just different things like that. But as far as like content and enjoyment, there are times that I feel like the plots of the movies tend to be kind of watered down, and I think Lucas kind of mentioned something along those lines. And so for me, I tend to not really enjoy watching Christian movies that often. But obviously, there's some really well-made ones like Fireproof. That was a great one. And I promise I'm not agreeing with everything Lucas says, but I feel like the genre is just like there's not that many like big Christian movies, quote unquote. So the ones that are big, like God's Not Dead and Fireproof, I don't know, like those are the ones that kind of have risen to the top because they tend to be more well-made than the other ones. So, yeah.
I agree with all of you. And Fireproof was good, Courageous was good, but I put Book of Eli up there because I had a question for each of you guys. What does make a piece of content Christian? Like, is it just quoting the Bible? Is it the themes? What? If you read the Old Testament, it's violent, so you can't just not take violence out of it. So what do you think could make these movies better?
I uh, to kind of piggyback off that, I don't mean to cut anybody off, but another big budget movie that you could say is probably even more of a Christian movie, whatever that means at this point, than Book of Eli was the movie Noah, because that movie had a massive budget too, and I remember seeing that in theaters. And to kind of my take on that question you asked is, what is the point of the movie? Like, what's the mission? Like regardless of the characters, the plot, all that stuff. Like, what do you want to leave the people watching this movie feeling? Like, what's that? What do you leave them with? Whether it's knowledge or just entertainment or like motivation or inspiration. I think you could probably guide it at least as a starting point with something along those lines, and then you go from there. And there's obviously more criteria you could give it. But Noah, for example, is a movie that's based on or if you believe in the Bible, nonfiction, and like, and I feel like that went the other way, where they grabbed Christian material and just adapted it to a mainstream audience versus, Book of Eli, which is like the opposite, where you got all this other stuff, and they adapted it to like incorporate the Bible and all this stuff. So, and no, I still don't know to this day if I like that movie or not. It's somewhere in the middle, because they took a lot of liberties with the story, and like I don't know, it just felt really weird watching it, because it's like, what's the point of this movie? It wasn't. I don't know. I guess it was trying to be inspirational, but it just like, I don't know. There's so much they could have done with it that would have been more accurate to the Bible, I believe, at least in my eyes. And they just kind of like, let's just go left turn to just generate headlines, I guess, is probably what they thought, like with churches or with non-Christian people. But
Agree.
but yeah.
Okay. So The Passion of the Christ, right? Like, would you consider that a Christian movie or not? And I only ask that because I know Mel Gibson directed it, and I guess I don't know too much about him personally, but like I'm not sure if he's a Christian or not. But would you say that movie is Christian? Because I know it's so like it's a huge movie known all over the world. But does that make it a Christian movie or not?
For me, I think it all depends on what the message behind the movie is, like at the end of it, because like the acting could be terrible or like the quality of it could be terrible, but the message behind it, if they like somehow relate it back to God and the Bible and finding Him, or just stuff like that, I think that's what makes it Christian.
For the next topic, Christian cartoons. What do you guys think about those?
Bro, fire. I love this genre, okay? I guess I'll start off. I think they're very underrated. Because growing up, I watched like all these cartoons and all these like shows, right? And I don't know. I always felt like they did a great job of getting me as a kid to be interested like in the story, just because they were so like engaging, riveting, like animated really well. Like the Prince of Egypt. Oh my gosh, I think that's one of the like the best animated like Christian movies or whatever you want to call it. But one thing I do want to say on like speaking about like Veggie Tales, I don't know if you guys knew this, but apparently Veggie Tales kind of had like a wider reach slash wider audience than I initially thought, because I remember uh, I don't know, a while back I was on Twitter, and like people who weren't like Christians, or maybe were raised as Christians but aren't anymore, they mentioned how much they watched Veggie Tales. So in my mind I always thought that was like a very Christian thing, but maybe it had like a popular like a reach outside of the Christian community. So I don't know. Overall, I think underrated.
I definitely agree with you. I think cartoons, they're just so cute. They get the message across. And sometimes the Bible is hard to read. So like sometimes people do need that level of like, even though it's meant for the kids, like it can be really meant for anybody. And like they're easy to understand and they're catchy. So I think they're underrated too.
I would agree with Nyla about it making like the Bible stories more like understandable and more like consumable for like the common person. So yeah, underrated for sure.
I haven't seen too many of them growing up, but I am familiar with the Prince of Egypt. I think I maybe watched it when I was a little kid, but I would probably, if I had to say from what I hear people, how I hear people talk about these specifically to these two, I would probably say underrated as well. And I do remember there was one episode of Rugrats where they actually depicted the story of the Jews leaving Egypt, and I remember that episode actually being really, really good, where Tommy was Moses and everything. And but yeah, anytime I've seen it depicted, it usually like they the girl said, and I think Joseph might have said, it makes it really digestible for kids, and it also makes them interested in the topic. And as they grow older, hopefully that grows into something more. But yeah, I appreciate that aspect of it, the fact that kids can get it.
I agree with all of you guys. I think it's more simplified, and unlike movies, you can take a lot more liberties creatively and execute it well a lot easier than you can with a film. So that's what I agree with.
All right, the next topic is schools. I think everyone except Lucas attended a Christian school.
Lucas, what do you think? And then we'll go off.
I don't know, because the thing is, there's a wide spectrum of it. There's like the Christian elementary schools versus like Christian colleges, and I feel like those are two different worlds, not just because of age, but just how enveloped you are in that world of Christianity and the Bible in that time. But I don't know. I'm conflicted, because I think it's like important to stay on top of that and keep your relationship strong with God and Jesus. But at the same time, I feel like you're doing a disservice to yourself if you're just being force fed like the Bible or teachings rather than learning on your own. So when you go to like a Christian school, you like, I don't know, it's different for everybody. What I've observed is like, hopefully that doesn't just like make people, I don't know, I hope people are going because they want to, and not just so they have that like, I got a Christian class today about theology, so I'm good kind of thing. I don't know how that's thought about, or what's the perspective on that. So I would hope that people are going and they don't lose that sense of passion for it, and don't just do it because they feel like they have to. So I don't know. I'm not rating it either way. I really don't have a say in that.
Let's go with the ladies, and then we'll go to Joseph.
Okay, I personally feel like Christian schools are overrated. Oh, go ahead, Nyla.
No, it's all you, girl.
Oh. Well, I personally feel like Christian schools are overrated because, like, I feel like they make it more of, like, an obligation of following Christ instead of, like, giving you the choice to. Like, they literally throwing it at you every day in every angle instead of just being, like, this is what it is, and, like, you have the option to come to. Like, I feel like, personally, I feel like God is, like, a gentleman. He shows you what he has and, like, gives you the option of coming to him. It's not like I'm going to, like, take you and you have to come with me. But I feel like a lot of Christian schools are just too forceful with their message, personally. But
Yeah, I agree, because if you're being told that you need to like follow God, opposed to wanting it to do yourself. The message gets lost like in the classes and stuff like that, opposed to like me willingly going to like chapel, for example, like being forced to go to chapel 5 days a week, opposed to me willingly go to chapel. If I was willingly going, I'm gonna be more open to listening and seeing what God really has to offer, opposed to being said, like, you're gonna go to chapel or you're getting kicked out of school, or you're gonna take these Christian classes, or you're gonna not be allowed, your GPA is gonna go down or something like that. So I think overrated.
Joe?
Yeah, I mean, those are some really good points right there, and I could definitely like relate to all of what you ladies just said, because I graduated from a Christian high school, and I've kind of been going to Christian schools almost all my life, with the exception of like a year or two. But it's kind of hard to label this, I'm not gonna lie, but if I was to pick, I would say they can be overrated, and the only reason why is I think being like I don't want to say being forced, but the idea of not really having a choice, of like if you want to attend the school or not. Because I know a lot of the kids in Christian schools, you know, their parents made that choice for them usually. Or something even funnier is there's usually a few kids that like were misbehaving in public school or whatever, and then were sent to Christian school. Because I ran into a few like that when I was in high school. So I think it can be a good thing, but there's a lot of elements that could definitely make it overrated and kind of hard to hard to get through in a way if you're, you know, forced to go to chapel or different things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's almost as if like having Christian parents, depending on the school, is kind of like depending on your parents. If your parents are like strict on you, sometimes the kids turn out like way worse than other kids just because it's like force fed. So I think it's similar to the schools. It kind of just depends on how they enforce it, because I went to Catholic high school and I fell asleep during chapel countless times. So like I get both sides.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was interesting to see you guys' takes because it like ultimately it's what it sounds like is that you have your relationship with Jesus, and what the school it feels like sounds like is it eliminates the free will part of it to an extent where you're just there, like you said, to keep that GPA up, or you know, to fill the requirements for the degree or the diploma. And ultimately I think that's like the foundation of like humanity and God and Him creating Adam and Eve, is everything is like that He gave us free will. So when you take that away, it kind of puts I think like an anomaly or like a wrench in that that relationship where you're kind of being led which way to go in a sense.
Yeah, I want to make one last comment actually. I think it could, the experience of going to like a Christian school could kind of be summed up in the idea of like not wanting to do something just because you're told to do it. Because I'm sure we've all had that experience, you know, like with chores or whatever. So I feel like that could kind of be a hindrance for people's relationship with God, is like if they're forced to like go to chapel or like go to this Bible class or whatever. So I think that's really what it comes down to.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate just cause. The only benefit I could see is if someone is like lukewarm and not sure, being around that environment where they're surrounded by people that genuinely do care and want the best of them spiritually can benefit a lot of students that are like in the in between and not necessarily built on like a foundation but are unsure. So
Yeah, I think it comes down to knowing yourself and the people that speak wisdom into your life, also knowing the best for you, and where it varies from person to person, like you mentioned. So
yeah, dope.
All right, that wraps it up. Another episode of Overrated. Thank you so much to my guests. Thank you guys for watching. And if you have any ideas for topics or you'd like to join the discussion, comment down below or DM me on Instagram. All right, next week we're going to be talking about is social media fame and clout overrated with a special guest. See you in the next one.